your chat bar down to the right-hand side of your panel. So feel free to add questions or comments or share your experiences on some of the topics we'll be covering. But we'll also have Q&A at the end of our presentation so we can have a more formal Q&A. In the interim, we'd love for you to follow us on Twitter at PeopleFluent, and we'll be sharing our thoughts and anything that you say to us using the hashtag recruitingCX. And after this presentation, we'll be happy to share any slides we have as well as the recording so you can share it with your organization. And also, we will keep this conversation going. We already have several blogs in our series about customer experience and candidate experience and the intersection of the two on our blog at peoplefluent.com, PeopleFluent-blog. So stay in touch with us, and we'd love to hear your thoughts as we go through it because a lot of you are out there in the field and have some great thoughts to share. So our presenters today, so I'm Sheridan Orr, and I'm going to serve as a presenter/host, but Ajay Patel is our talent strategy architect here at PeopleFluent, and he has a robust experience as both a practitioner and as a strategist. He came from Home Depot and Advance Auto and CarQuest and HD Supply, who are all PeopleFluent customers. So he is a walking, living, breathing customer case study. So it's nice to have him on.
Hello, everyone.
Thanks for joining us, AJ. And I am new to PeopleFluent, but I come with an extensive customer experience background. I did the customer experience for Starbucks and Macy's and Standard Chartered Bank out of all of their Asian operations and T-Mobile. So if you see those pink stores, you can blame me, but I think they're delightful. So just the agenda we're going to cover today is we're going to go through the Amazon challenge, and we're going to challenge you to see if you can make your candidate experience like your Amazon shopping experience. We're going to talk a bit about how candidates are consumers and the psychology of that. We'll talk about how the candidate journey can inform a lot of your decisions and how you want to think about what you're architecting for. And candidate effort is customer effort is the latest metric in predicting loyalty and brand experience. And so we want to talk about how you can use some of those learnings to understand your candidate effort score. And then we'll talk a little bit about the brand and experience and how those two intersect. And then we'll talk about the rewards you get as a firm and as a talent team on having a great experience. And then we'll go into our Q&A. So, AJ, let's talk a little bit about the Amazon challenge that we're going to lay out for our participants today.
Yeah, sure. So let's start out by dreaming big, right? What if you could have a hiring process that lasted one day, right? Let's go after a big goal. So Amazon is trying to do this, right? So if you look at what happened in the news last week, right, they had a big hiring day. Their goal was to hire 50,000 team members, some full-time, some part-time, across about 10 of their locations, right? So they were able to accomplish their goals. You look at what McDonald's has done. They've actually done a little bit of this earlier this year and last year as well. And they're even starting to use Snapchat and incorporating that into some of their hiring experiences. So not to say we're all going to get to a one-day hiring process, right? But when you think about the customer experience with Amazon, it's so quick and easy, right? And it's almost like they already know you, right? Wouldn't it be great if your candidate experience and your hiring experience was like that as well, where you could actually engage with the firm and it would almost be like they knew you already, right? And you could get through the process quickly and easily. So what we're going to talk about today is maybe not the one-day challenge, but how can we at least shorten that and how can we make that experience a lot better, not only for the candidate, but for actually the company themselves as well.
So many of you have an Amazon experience, and what we love about it is that it's simple, it's quick, and it's personalized. And so we'll talk a little bit today about how you take your candidate experience from possibly feeling a little bit like being at the DMV to that Amazon elegant experience. So our candidates are consumers, and they spend a lot of their day actually being treated like consumers, and that behavior, especially with millennials, is what they start to expect from all of their engagements. And so when they become candidates, that is what they're expecting. And that puts a lot of pressure on us as talent teams to really understand how we appeal to them And so that has really made recruiters and HR teams have to become marketers. So if you want to have your Mad Men cocktail while you do this, it's okay. So we earlier showed the Amazon screen that I log into, but almost all customer journeys start with an emotional need. So my son is getting ready to go to college this weekend. And so I went to Google, as many of you probably do whenever you have a need. First thing you do is go to the Google search bar, and I was like, what to do when your son goes to college? And so I started to look at these survival guides to keep me from crying in the car on the way home. And the biggest thing was you need to find an activity that fills that time that used to be sitting on the sidelines at soccer matches. And so I decided I was going to take up golf. So I had that emotional need. I narrowed my search down so that golf made sense for me, and then I started evaluating options. So how did I learn to play golf? How did I build a social network around it? And then how did I make the right purchase for me? So if you don't know me, I'm like 5'2", but I wear really high heels all the time, so I lie and say I'm 5'5", but my golf clubs know exactly how tall I am. So I had to get the petite clubs, and I needed some with a really big sweet spot because I don't pay attention a lot. So that's how I made my purchase. But then when I decided, like, the product that I was going to buy, I needed to think about how did I decide which firm to use. So I wanted service, and then so I went to Golf Galaxy, and they were like, we have golf tech. You can take lessons right here. Here's a list of ladies in your area who have just started playing. And, you know, I really wanted to build that community. And so as we talk through the process of your candidate journey, it's going to start with that emotional need at the beginning, and it may end with an emotional need of how do you get onboarded appropriately into your organization and build those connections. And that's how you get both consumer and candidate loyalty. So AJ, you want to talk?
Yes, Sheridan.
You want to talk to us about Google Jobs and how those initial search bar interactions are coming into the talent community?
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, as most of you know, right, most job searches start on Google. That's actually been the truth for a long time now. But what Google actually rolled out with either last week or the week before is what they're calling their Google Jobs platform. So if you've done a job search in the last week and a half, you'll notice that it looks a little different now when you actually type in anything to do with jobs or careers or a specific job that you're looking for. You're now going to get this kind of gridded view, and it's almost Google's version of a job board, right? So Google basically decided, hey, if everyone's coming to our site and starting the job search here, why redirect them out somewhere else? Let's actually just embed that right within Google. So what you're going to start seeing is more and more of Google Jobs kind of being the main source of where candidates are going to access your jobs. So if you haven't heard about it, I would highly recommend you read about it and reach out to your vendors and challenge them on how they're actually interacting with Google Jobs to make sure you're going to show up and to make sure you're going to show up not only just as a regular search, but as a relevant search with your branding, with your job titles, et cetera.
Yep. And if you want to find out more, we recently published a blog on Google Hire and Google Jobs, so you definitely want to read that. And that is have some advice about how you can start creating job listings so that you can be prepared to show up and rank really highly on these searches. So thanks, AJ.
Yeah, and so just kind of piggybacking off what Sheridan said about kind of that emotional need, right, when you actually go purchase a product, right? Well, that same thing kind of happens with your candidate journey as well, right? So here are just some common searches that might be put into Google. You know, maybe you've been working really hard at your job and you just got passed over for a promotion, right? So maybe you actually go out to Google and kind of search on that, see what other people have done what this has happened to, right? Or maybe you're just a little frustrated with the career growth in your current company, right? So maybe you want to look for jobs that have a better career path for you, right? Or maybe you just want to be part of a winning organization that other people are excited to work for, right? So maybe it's a Google search about what are the best companies to work for in my area.
That's great. And on the customer experience side, we would call this the path to purchase. And so you start with that really high overarching emotional need as, you know, I've been passed over, or I really want to grow in my company, and then you may narrow down to great companies to work for. And so you need to think about, as Google really strikes a pose in the job search market, how do you use content and tell your story along that continuum?
Yeah, so this same journey that Sheridan just kind of showed you with her empty nest syndrome and her new golfing hobby, same exact continuum when you think about a candidate, right? So we kind of talked about that first emotional need, right? Whether it be the frustration about your career growth or simply the need to make more money, right? It kind of starts there. And then you kind of decide as a candidate, well, what am I going to do about this, right? And you start seeking those solutions, right? And then you figure out through your research, narrowing down those options. What are the companies I want to work for? And then choosing those firms and actually going through an application process and then hopefully going through that hiring process. So very, very similar, right, to that same consumer journey.
Yep. And as you go through journeys, think about when you've gone through a purchase journey or even when you took the job that you have now, there's certain inflection points along that journey that create more emotion. So you have very high emotion when you first start that search. And so if you don't hear back, it actually, as much emotion as goes into a journey is kind of the rebound effect. So either it's positive or negative, and you get exactly a response of if you're super excited about something and you don't hear back, that equals to the amount of disappointment you have. So as you are thinking about your candidate journey, I would start with where do they start on the continuum with you, and then what does it look like all the way to onboarding, and maybe whiteboard this. And then take a moment to think about where are those key emotional inflection points. You know, certainly one is when you apply and you don't hear or you do hear something back. And then another may be, I went on an interview, how did that go? Or, that blank space may feel very uncomfortable if they don't hear back from you. So this is a great example. So often a candidate journey is like a consumer journey. Wherever you end the process is the most prevailing emotion. So if you get the job, you're super excited. If you don't for some reason, then you're negative. So wherever you fell out of that journey. And so here's an example from Delta Airlines, and this is a campaign that they did with their most valued and frequent flyers, and they called it Middle Seat Monday. So, these people who are out on the road all the time, they get a middle seat. It's not comfortable. It's not the ideal customer experience, and so they could end there. You had this middle seat on the flight from New York to San Francisco, and it was awful. But what they've done is they've sent an email that is really positive and humorous, like, hey, you had a middle seat Monday. We're so sorry. We're going to give you 500 points for, just having to endure that. Thank you so much for your business. And, you can never use those points anyway, but they have managed to extend that customer journey or end on a high note. And so we have a couple of examples of how actual talent teams are doing that, right, AJ?
Yeah, and one example I'll share just about flying as well. So I happen to be a Delta flyer. I switch back and forth between Delta and Southwest. So Southwest actually just did this with me a couple of weeks ago. I was on a flight where we got caught on the tarmac, right? It was raining. Really wasn't Southwest's fault at all. But I got an email the next day that said, hey, sorry you were stuck on the tarmac for an extra half hour. Here's an extra, I can't remember the value, but again, it's like, just 500,000 points, right? But the point was, wow, they actually engaged with me and actually said, hey, we're sorry you went through that experience, right? So if you're a Southwest flyer, I'm sure you absolutely love Southwest, and this is part of what makes them so great is really that connection with their consumers. So another example of that, and tying it back to the candidate experiences, we've got kind of a case study here about a marquee retailer, and this actually did happen. Of course, it's anonymized, but so they actually tied in a coupon as part of their application experience. So when you are actually done, actually with the application, most of those folks aren't going to get hired, right? But what can you do to really turn that around, like Sheridan's saying, right? Well, here's a way. Number one, you're getting a coupon, right? So you can save money with that store. But then number two, you're really engaging that candidate with your brand all over again. Because especially in retail, your candidates are your customers, and those brands really do tie together. So this was a way to say, hey, thanks for applying. Now basically come spend money with us, right? So as a candidate, even if you're not selected, you have a positive experience that you're walking away with versus a negative. And there's a business impact to that, right? So this retailer, it was somewhere in the $1 million range of sales that were generated through that specific coupon code. So it can actually have business value as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really a good point to think about how your brand advocates often are the ones that are most likely to apply to your firm. So you want to make sure you keep them in that position. So thanks, AJ. So one of the most interesting bits of research that's come out of the customer experience world recently is the whole idea of high effort and customer effort, and it really is the metric du jour. And so if you take that and you think about the candidate experience, and candidates are consumers, you really do want to make sure you have a low effort process, and we're going to give you some ideas on how you can do that and make sure that you're have the right process. So low effort scores are highly correlated to customer loyalty, and that is one of the reasons that Amazon delivers 100 boxes to my doorstep every week, is because I'm very loyal to them. But I have very low effort in my engagement, so definitely want to think about that. So again, candidates are consumers. So let's talk about how do you figure out what your customer effort scores. So are you more like the DMV, or are you skewing more to the Amazon side? So do you have a difficult experience, or is it easy? So AJ, how do we make a great candidate experience with low effort?
Yeah, so a lot of these things are pretty simple, right? But it really takes you to take a step back and almost put yourself in that candidate's shoes and really go through your own process, right? So first off, what about your job descriptions, right? Do they make sense, or are they just a bunch of word vomit, right? And how am I going to actually figure out what this job actually entails, right? So for a lot of firms, their job descriptions end up just being, what's pulled out of their HR system, right? But when you're actually posting your jobs, you really have to think of them differently. They're job advertisements, right? So from a legal perspective, yes, you've got to have some of those minimum qualifications and some of those things in the job description, but you've also got to make it appealing for people who actually are applying to your job. So think about making them more like a bulleted list, put something that's kind of catchy in the very beginning, what's going to actually grab that candidate, get them interested in that job. Think about the experience itself, right? If you've got multiple positions that are similar, right, are you expecting that candidate to have to apply to each of those positions separately, or do you have a way where they can kind of en masse apply to that specific set of jobs that they're interested in? Think about the search experience, right? When a candidate comes to your site, how easy it is for them to even search for the right jobs, and how are those structured? One piece of advice I'd give here is don't think about yourself trying to search for a job. Give it to your spouse, give it to your son, give it to your daughter, and ask them, hey, if you were looking for a driver job, what would you do on this career site? Where would you go, right? See what they would do, and that can give you a different perspective on how candidates actually behave amongst your career site. Providing the same information that was just asked, right? So when you think about actually applying, if you've just asked for my resume, why are you then going to ask me for my name again? Or why are you then going to make me build out my whole job history when it's right there in my resume, right? So is there a way that you can parse that through your ATS, or are there other ways of gathering that information and not asking it multiple times? A frustrating mobile experience, right? So everyone's heard it now, but mobile traffic is continuing to increase on the talent acquisition side. You'll hear numbers anyway from a third to almost 50% of most candidate traffic is now via some sort of mobile device. Well, if your experience isn't optimized or responsive for that mobile device, that's going to be a very bad experience for that candidate. And then kind of piggybacking off of that, think about how long it actually takes to apply. So back in the day, 10, 15 years ago, when ATSs were kind of first coming out, we weren't really worried about how long the application was. We were more worried about gathering every piece of data we could on a candidate. So, we would expect a 35-minute application process. Well, those days are long gone. So now we've really got to take a step back and figure out what is the data we truly need to make that initial first decision on a candidate. That should really be all the data that you ask up front. And then you can ask some of that other data later on in the process. So think about how you can shorten that application, and also think about the number of pages and clicks, right? So there's been a lot of research on this, but for basically every page you add to your application, you should expect another somewhere between 30 and 50% drop-off for every page that you add to your application. And then think about just the time, right? So basically think about the whole process in general. When you're buying something, right, you want it to be as quick and seamless as possible, right? So the same thing, not only with the application process, but all the way through kind of the interview process as well. What are some of the bottlenecks in your company, and what can you do to kind of eliminate some of those bottlenecks or make the process a little bit more efficient? And then the last thing, Sheridan kind of hit on this, right, but the uncertainty about the process or the progress that you're making as a candidate. When you kind of fall into that black hole, or maybe you had that interview and, you know, the recruiter says, all right, well, we'll get back to you in a couple weeks, right? And those next couple of weeks are just really nerve-wracking, right? So wouldn't it be nice if the recruiter could even call you and say, hey, we haven't forgotten about you, just, you know, everything's on track. It'll still be another, you know, week before we have any decisions. Even that little bit of a touch point is just going to make that candidate feel so much better because, again, think about it. Put yourself in those shoes, right? How would you feel if it was a week, 2 weeks, where you're just sitting there waiting for that next piece of information about your process, right?
Yeah, and Ajay, I think your point about job descriptions is really apropos, especially we just talked about Google, because nobody's going to search for that associate 2 job. So you want to try to match intent and that search bar with what your actual job titles are. Right. So let's talk a little bit about your candidate effort score. So just take a little back of the napkin guess at this. So here's some things that can actually give you a positive candidate experience, and here are things that can actually just detract from that. So you want to talk us through some of those things?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously in the Amazon continuum, right, for every one of those buckets, give yourself a +1, right? And for every one of the DMV continuums, ding yourself 1 point, right, and see where you end up when you add it all up. But I will have to say, my DMV in Georgia is actually really great, and they actually have a great customer experience, so not all DMVs are created equal. But when you think about your application, right, what we just talked about, is it quick or is it long, right? I think a good target is right around 10 minutes. Anything over that, these days I would consider a long application, right? So your target should be less than 10, and if you can get it even less than that, fantastic, right? Think about the actual personalization itself, right? So you're going to gather this candidate's name, for instance, right? How can you use that information to actually communicate with them in a more personalized way? Think about the ways that your candidates are interacting with your career site, right? Is it device agnostic, and can they get in from their Xbox if they wanted? Can they get in from their laptop? Can they get in from however it is that they're going to get in? Transparency again, right? So do those candidates know where they are in the process? Not just through kind of the interview process, but think about the application process itself, right? Think about leaving some breadcrumbs so they actually know how many pages are left or how far they are in the process. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Or is it more of just a generic, hey, you're just another sheep, come on through our application process, right? Think about kind of, this is a human touch, right? So respectful, or is it inhuman, right? Is it truly, again, going back to, am I a sheep going through this process, or do I feel like this company cares about me and is actually trying to interact with me on a human level? And then the last one, right, being consistent with the value promise. So you've worked really hard on your employment brand, you've got this great EVP that you've developed, and then the first experience that this candidate has is going through the application process, and it's mind-numbing and impersonal, right? So it's very inconsistent with that value promise that you've just given that candidate, right? So think about those things as you're adding up your score.
Perfect. So one of the things that we've all heard over and over, especially when we've talked about millennials, and I think some of you followed our millennial series last year, but personalization has actually been proven to increase customer engagement. And just to practice what we preach, welcome, Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us, and glad to see you, Ashley, and Tracy Hintermeister. What are you having for lunch? And Paige, it was good to see you in Chicago, and we're glad to have you back. So thank you so much for joining. So many of you have been like us, had to pick out the Coke bottle that reminded you of someone or desperately searched for your name. There are no Sheridan Coke bottles, I'd just like for you to know. But, you know, Coke was in a very brand-locked situation. People were either devoted to Pepsi or Coke, or they weren't soda drinkers at all. And as such, they had had 10 years of declining sales. That entrenched brand loyalty really made it difficult for them to grow their business. And so what they did was they started putting these fun names on the Cokes, and they had to share a Coke with a friend. And it actually created staggering growth just with that one change. They didn't change the formula. They had the same investment in advertising. And it, in some places, was 28% more wallet share of soda purchases in the same period in the previous year. So personalization makes a difference, and with those Amazon experiences or with Coke, people start to really appreciate those. And you know, we're getting a lot of information from your applicant tracking system, so how might you use that, Ajay?
Yeah, well, so here's another example, right, of why in Virgin America, right? So when you get into your seat, they already know who you are, right? So you're actually welcomed. Hello, Michelle, right? They obviously know where you're going. Hopefully they do, or you're in big trouble, right? But then they're going to tell you about your destination and get you excited about it, right? Well, think about your candidate experience. Why can't it be the same way, right? After you've collected some of that information and you know exactly what position that candidate's applying for, get them excited about that. And maybe you've got a different experience for that. So for instance, maybe if they're applying for a driver, you take them down a different path or drive them down a different road than if someone's applying for a financial analyst, right? And maybe some of the information that you're now going to present that person is going to be totally different, right, depending on what kind of role that they're actually applying for.
Great. So you already have their name and contact, as Ajay said. So what are some other things we could do to personalize that candidate journey? Yeah,
well, think about, for instance, I'll use that driver example again, right? So do you want to, say, talk about how great the office environment is to a driver, or do you want to kind of talk to them about how they can get on the open road and you know, the freedom of driving for your company, right? So you really have to think about what is important to that candidate for that kind of specific role. It's not going to be the same for everyone, right? So it's great that you've developed these great EVPs and you've got this great employment brand, but it's not going to resonate with everyone the same. So really think about those different experiences and almost breaking those out and figuring out how you want to segment those actually on your career site and even your interview process as well. And then just something kind of cheesy, like for instance, when they come in for an interview, what about having just a sign that says, hey, AJ, welcome, we're excited to interview with you, right? Instead of them kind of walking in and being nervous and sitting in the sterile lobby and just waiting to be called up, right? So just think of all of those little ways, those little touches that you can add to that experience.
Yeah. And brand experiences are built one interaction at a time. So every time that you are engaging with a candidate, you're either building brand equity or you're detracting from it. So just think about those small touches, and they actually can add up to be quite meaningful. So here's an example from Dominos Pizza. And so back in the day when I was in college, the first thing you did when you ordered a Domino's Pizza was what? You set your watch, because their value promise was 30 minutes or less or it's free. That's what we want. That's what we expected. We didn't care how good the pizza was. We just cared that it got there 30 minutes or faster so that we can have bad pizza for free. So Domino's realized that they didn't have an opportunity to grow their market that way, so they had a whole transparent campaign about our pizza sucks and we know it. And they actually bought millions of dollars of commercial time on major networks to tell us that their pizza sucks. But it actually gave us all an opportunity to look at them again because of that transparency. We had already made up their mind that it's for poor college kids, and now we're looking at Domino's again. So transparency can be a great way to open doors and to build relationships. So, AJ, how do we take that transparency concept and add it to our candidate experience?
Yeah, so I don't think you have to be as bold as to put out on your career site, hey, our old application was terrible, but welcome to our new one, right? But here's some ways that you can actually think about that process, right? So we kind of mentioned those breadcrumbs earlier, right? I think one of the most frustrating things with any process is not knowing where you are in that process, right? And for application processes especially. Am I 5 minutes in, or am I 5 minutes left, or am I 5 minutes in and have 30 minutes left, right? So showing some sort of breadcrumbs or some sort of progression through the application to really let them know specifically where they are, huge, right? Think about your knockout questions. If you know there are certain things that are minimum qualifiers, why not ask those up front and then kind of weed out those folks that may not qualify or even meet the minimum quals? Why have them go through an entire application and waste their time when you were going to disqualify them anyway, right? So there are organizations that are starting to put those knockout questions up front, and then actually through logic, either moving them through the application or telling them, thank you for applying, and here's why you didn't meet our minimum quals, right? Please come back when you've met this requirement. And actually a lot of candidates are going to appreciate that versus actually spending half an hour going through an application that they were never going to be considered for. Be open about the process requirements and company culture, right? So not everything is going to be roses and sunshine, right? So talk about the good and bad about the position, right? Why sugarcoat it up front just to set the wrong expectations and potentially hire someone who after 90 days is going to leave because it's not what they signed up for, right? So there are different ways of showing this, right? Through interactive videos, through linking out to maybe different social media pages that can show not only the good, but what the tough parts of the job too, right? If it's very hot, or if the hours are long, or if it's going to be dirty, whatever those things are, right? Don't be as scared or ashamed to talk about those things, right? Because you want candidates to be prepared for what they're going to get into. And then another thing, and we'll talk about different ways of doing this, right, is when they're no longer being considered, let them know, but also give them something else as well, right? And it's hard to do this in every case, right? But you at least want to let them know where they are if they're not being considered, and if you can somehow help that candidate, right? Telling them maybe what part of their qualifications they didn't quite meet, or maybe giving them a suggestion of how they might want to further educate themselves. Those things are huge, right? And it's another way where you can engage with the candidate versus just kind of telling them no, good luck.
Great, thank you so much. And I think feedback is a real part of transparency, isn't it, AJ?
Yeah, definitely, right? So again, just going back to kind of that whole black hole syndrome, right? And we really need to get away from this, and we really want to be as open with the candidates as possible, right? So if they're not going to be a right fit, let them know, right? And there's definitely ways of automating this. So don't feel like you've got to literally type out 50 emails for every requisition of the folks that aren't a good fit. Also, talk to your hiring managers, right? It's not just, oh, this person wasn't a good fit, but if you can actually get your managers to think of ways that that candidate could develop into a better candidate, those are things that your recruiters might be able to share with that candidate to help them be a better professional or help them in their career growth or try to attain the goals that they're trying to attain. And let them know if they're a silver medalist and stay in touch with them, right? So this is so key for organizations. For a lot of recs that you're working, you're obviously going to end up with your final candidate, but you may have 2 or 3 other great candidates, right? You can't just shelve those and forget about them. Number one, keep them engaged and keep them warm with your brand and with your company. And then the next time a similar rec comes up, well, that's right where you should go to, right? So challenge your vendors and your systems to figure out how you can accurately do this and efficiently do this.
And that's the fastest way to the 24-hour hire, right?
Well, there you go, right?
So, perfect. All right, so let's talk about Progressive.
All right, so I'm a big Flow fan, right? So I had to give Flow a plug here. But one of the things I really kind of appreciate about Progressive is that kind of the rate calculator, right? You'll put in some info, and it'll kind of tell you the rate not only for Progressive, but for some of their other competitors. And what I've appreciated about this is Progressive doesn't always come out as the top and the cheapest, right? They're very transparent about there are certain profiles where they're going to be more expensive than, say, another insurance company. It's actually quite clever, right? So number one, you've kind of built a trust with a brand because they're being very transparent. But secondly, they're really taking those high-risk customers and almost pushing them off to their competition, which is kind of funny. But it's really just a way of engaging their customers in a totally different way. They're not trying to spin it like we're always going to be the cheapest or we're going to save you 15% no matter what. But they're going to give you a kind of an interactive way of showing where they're the best and sometimes where they're not.
Great. And you know, we often talk about speed and transparency, and you had talked about the knockout questions early. Can you be too fast?
You can be too fast, right? And I think with certain knockout questions, kind of makes sense to let them know right away, hey, it's because, you know, you didn't have a college, degree, right? But once you've graduated, please reach back out to us. We'd love to hear from you, right? But there's other times where you don't necessarily want to knock them out right away. So you can kind of build in a delay of that kind of hey, you know, thanks but no thanks types of communications. So maybe having at least a day delay on some of that, so that way the candidates don't feel like they really just fell into a machine and got spit out as a no. But for the most part, speed is going to matter, right, especially once they're kind of moving through the process. Think about when you buy something, right, and you want to have that shipped, you know, 2 days, right? Or if you've got that, you know, slow free shipping, you kind of want to know, like, how soon is it going to get here, right? Well, same thing as a candidate, right? As I'm going through this process, where am I in this process, and can you tell me? And can you tell me kind of now instead of 5 days from now? Same sort of concept.
Great, and I think a week feels a lot longer when you're waiting to hear back from a company about a job than it probably feels like when you are grinding through other requisitions.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about Apple, and I had to throw this in. If AJ was going to get flow, I was going to get to talk about Apple, and he dislikes Apple, and I don't know what's wrong with him. But
Android for the win.
No, but Apple spent all of this time and energy creating elegant products and elegant experiences and great service, and when they decided that they were going to open a retail arm, it had to reflect that brand. The experience had to be the same. It had to be simplified and modern, and if they had opened up a traditional retail store with checkout counters and it looked just like the Gap or another brand that it could be actually interchanged with, it wouldn't have been that Apple experience for which they charge a premium. So a brand is not only what you say it is what other people say it is. So you may have spent a lot of time defining your EVP or making sure that you had the right brand promise. And my sense is you probably talked to a lot of people who either joined you or did not join you, and those were the people who said these are the great things about this firm or these are the challenges. But brand is not what you say it is. And often that is a culmination of experiences, what people think your brand is. So, for instance, if you have a brand in a video that has people sliding through your office and cheering for each other, and your interview room looks like something at the local police station, I am really beating up on the DMV and the police station. Not that I've been to the other, but you really want to be true to that promise because it makes you feel inauthentic. And there's nothing worse for a brand to say who we are and then the experience to be completely different. So what kind of experiences do we have, AJ?
Well, think about, so tying back in the candidate experience, right? If we talk about we're a company that's agile and we move with the market and we're innovative, right? And then you've got this process, this lumbering beast of a process that seems like it's taking months to get to an actual offer. What kind of experience is that, right? And you basically just kind of shot yourself in the foot with talking about your brand, but then literally showing them the first experience is the exact opposite, right? So again, when you think about what you're saying is your employment brand, right? What are you saying your EVP is? Make sure your process kind of mirrors that, right?
Yeah. And a great way for you to know how you're living towards your brand is to use the Net Promoter Score at your interview process so that you can understand, you know, would people recommend that other people interview with you? So that gives you a really quick snapshot, and Net Promoter Score is super easy. You can really implement it with SurveyMonkey. So, cool. And then, so what do we get ultimately if we do all of these things, right, AJ?
Yeah, so, you know, talking about those experiences, right, they can be extremely positive or extremely negative, right? And if you fall in one end of those spectrum, that's where you're really going to start to get your candidates or your consumers that are going to talk about that experience, right? Either an extremely positive experience and they're going to share that with their friends and family and post about that on social media, or the exact opposite, right? That extremely frustrating and negative experience, well, they're definitely going to go out to social media and post that as well, right? And talk to all their family and friends about what they just went through, right? So number one, right, do you want to be a positive marketer for your organization or do you want to be a negative marketer, right? So it really comes back to what that candidate experience looks like. Some of the positives, right, if you actually have a great experience, number one, your brand's going to spread just through word of mouth, right? Just of friends talking to friends about, hey, I just went through this amazing interview experience and the application experience was just amazing. Or, wow, this company is just so behind the times and they never got back to me and, you know, I'm never going to shop there again, or I don't want to be associated with that brand, right? More referrals, right? So through that word of mouth, those same people can actually refer your brand. And at the end of the day, what that can lead to, right, is better candidates. Those brands that are strong and those brands that candidates believe are strong are the ones that are going to get the stronger applicants.
Perfect. So we have some key takeaways for you, and one of them is you cannot change your brand or your experience one day at a time.
Yeah, exactly. So Rome wasn't built in a day, right? So just chip away at this, right? So it is really important to take a step back and, like Sheridan was saying, really whiteboard out that entire experience. But the goal of that session is not that you're going to blow it all up and fix it in one day. It's really that you're going to start making tweaks here and there through that spectrum to start changing some of that experience, right? So the first thing is, in the retail speak, right, shop your store. So go in and actually go through as an applicant so you're fully aware of what it actually is like to be an applicant at your own company. So then you can actually start to either feel that joy or feel that pain. The next piece is look at what your competitors are doing, right? Not because you necessarily want to emulate them, but you want to be better than them, right? So, but it does set a bar of where you at least need to be, right? And obviously you're going to want to take that to the next level so you can be a differentiator amongst your competition. And then once you've kind of figured out what your vision is or where you want to go, really challenge your vendors to help you with this, right? It shouldn't just be the same status quo of, oh, well, this is only what my ATS can do, and this is only what my CRM can do, right? And this is only what my career site can do. Really challenge your vendors to kind of meet your visions as well. And then the last thing is really share those goals amongst your organization, because everyone really plays a role in this candidate experience, especially your hiring managers, but all the way down to even your recruiting coordinators or the folks that are generating your offer letters. All of those pieces really touch that candidate experience, right? So as much as you can get everyone on board, the better.
Great. So we are going to go into our Q&A session, but if you have any questions or you think that you'd like to have us come and talk to you about your customer or candidate experience, we're happy to do so. You can send me an email at sheridanorr@peoplefluent.com, and we'll arrange with one of our strategists to come and go through your candidate experience and give you some feedback and make some personalized suggestions. You also will want to follow us on Twitter, and we have some of those blogs that we already talked about. A couple that would be super interesting to people on this call are the Google Hire one that we just posted. We also did one, AJ and I, on candidates are your customers and your customers are your candidates, so you may want to check that one out. And as we go into Q&A, I'm already starting to get them queued up, and we do have one answer, though. I asked Tracy Hintermeister what she had for lunch, and she says a salad, so yay for you, Tracy. So please use your chat console to the right, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. And I already have the first one is, AJ, if you don't have a big budget like Apple, how do you start implementing some of these things?
Yeah, so, you know, you don't have to have a huge budget to have a huge and positive experience, right? So what you can do first, right, is definitely having those kind of whiteboarding sessions where you're really mapping out everything. That's a free exercise, right, for your company to go through and really learn about what that experience is, right? And then there are certain things you can do kind of on the cheap, as I say, right? So think about all of the questions you're asking in your application, for instance, right? Are there a series of maybe 5 or 10 questions that you don't need to ask, right? Well, you can go ahead and get rid of those, right? Think about the different kind of paths that candidates can take, right? There may be easy ways to either put some extra content up on your career sites that really guide candidates in the right direction, right? Or maybe it's just posting some easy, fun videos about your company, right? Marketing may have a conniption about this, but maybe you can walk around with your cell phone in the office and just kind of record a day in the life of, right? And potentially that can be posted out on the career site, right? So there are definitely ways of engaging without having to spend big bucks.
Yeah, and I think bringing in your marketing team early is a great suggestion too, because they typically have budget. Maybe you can draft onto other projects that they have that may be similar. You can use some of the same creative. And I think one of the biggest things is just to be human, right? How do you want to be treated? And we always talked about that as the golden rule of customer service. It's also the golden rule of candidate interaction.
Yeah.
super excited about the next question. So how much is it to consult or to review our candidate experience? It is free. We are happy to do it, and we want to make sure everybody's having the type of candidate experience that we've talked about. So we are delighted to help you in any way we can. Right, Ajay?
Well, I guess now that you've put it out there, Sheridan, I guess it is free.
It's free. Free. So any other questions that we have?
Yeah, well, as we're waiting for the next question, I do want to piggyback off what Sheridan said about that human touch, right? So as we just further evolve with technology, right, and as things become more automated, we are kind of losing that human touch, right? So really think about those places in your process where you can make it human again, right? Those cheesy things like just having a little sign with that person's name, right, or a personalized email, whatever those things are. Remember, those candidates are humans just like you, right? So
now our next question is about automation and human. How do you balance the both of those?
Yep.
And actually, one of the things that you can do is if you are sending out an email, and it may be a rejection email, like have your marketing team or somebody who's actually a writer draft that copy. So for instance, and clearly AJ and I have been traveling, so all of our examples are travel examples. But American Airlines has a brand voice that is very buttoned up and military-like. That's, they like their pilots to be very, spiffily dressed. And so their reservation voice is, hey, thank you for booking. Your reservation is 6234 BYK. And, it's very formal. But then Southwest may say, we're looking forward to having you on our flight, or bon voyage. So even those automated emails can have your brand voice, and as you think about you've built this EVP, how do you let that permeate through all interactions that you have?
Yeah, and the next thing, just going to branding too, right? So those communications, I would highly advise them not just being kind of these text-based emails that get sent out that feel like literally a machine sent them out, right? But definitely work with your marketing team, get them branded, get some imagery on there, and really represent who you are as a company with literally every communication you have with a candidate.
Great. Well, I think that is it for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay in touch with us on @PeopleFluent. Will the slides be sent to us for re-review? Yes, absolutely. So make sure that you can see them and anything you need to know. The last thing is stay in touch with us via Twitter, because we want to make sure that you know about upcoming presentations or catch us at other events, and we're happy to help you. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Have a good
everyone.
day. Cheers.